Hi, I'm Chris from Air Windows, and what I'm doing right here is doing a test video. I think I might have a bug in here. Okay, I'll be a little silly for a bit here. I don't want any bug freaking in my hair while I'm dealing with things. I'm going to edit this. Clearly, I thought I felt something touching the top of my head. Yeah, I'm Chris from Air Windows, and I'm making a video with this little Yee that I modified for two reasons. One, to test out how that configuration works and whether I can set it up in such a way that I can do sort of driving videos and talk to the camera while also driving. It's that whole, dead mouse takes people for coffee kind of thing, except for it's not really as far to go for anywhere since I'm not in Canada. Anyways, the purpose of this is to do a baseline reading for how loud the car is without any Airtabs, without any Dynamat, without any of the other stuff, because I'm going to be putting together a little reference on acoustic treatment in a car for the purposes of anybody who is interested in doing that. I find there's a lot of misunderstanding in how that kind of stuff even works. People don't get what it is to damp things, so it needs a little explaining. So, I will head out forthwith. And I'll shut off the stereo, because now the neat thing about the Xiaomi Yee in this circumstance is it is a set volume level. Oh, and I'm also going to be doing a video of what the exhaust sounds like. This is not perfectly stock, even though it's stock of acoustic treatment, because what I've done is put in an AEM air filter and done some modifications to the airbox, so as you may be able to hear it, it's a little revier than you might have normally. I'm going to just take a little drive, and I'm doing this recording. Hopefully the camera won't fall off. This is maybe not the final camera mount, but it is the camera mount that I have for my GPS, so I'm just kind of recycling that. I've also got some little streamers on the top of my car, which are going to help direct the Airtabs. Airtabs are plastic things that you put on your car, and they produce vortexes, aerodynamic turbulence in a particular way. They're a very effective way of generating large amounts of turbulence with small amounts of drag. They cause a sort of swirling effect. Excuse me. And for that reason, that's going to be the first thing I do, and that's what I'm doing today, is getting a baseline noise reading, and then I'll run the same drive circuit, which includes jumping onto, I think, Route 9. And there is a area where, if all goes well anyhow, I have a stoplight. In fact, and then from out of that stoplight I can do 60 miles an hour on a state highway. It's not 91, mind you, but it's pretty close. If I was to jump on 91, I'd have to go farther in order to go and turn around and come back. So yeah, this is a test of a number of things. One of the things is testing out what this in-car cam experience is like, because if that works out for me, I might do more of it. It might actually be kind of important because it might be useful for me to do. And then the other part is a baseline reading on the sound in this car. And with regard to the Airtabs, what I'm most concerned about is air noise. It's the wind noise. And to give a proper example of that, I need to get the here we go. Hello. In order to get a proper example of the wind noise, I'm only doing like 35, 37 or so, and even that I'm not supposed to be doing here. I have to get onto that state highway so that I can zip it up to about 60 or so. Then you'll hear what the wind sounds like, and I'll be able to intercut between this footage and the footage of the test drive using the Airtabs. And those will illustrate the reduction in wind noise from using these aerodynamic technologies. And then yeah, I'm craning over here because I'm looking to see what angles. I have yarn on my hood, and the yarn is for showing. It's me using the gears to slow down. The yarn is showing me the direction that the airflow is going, because if you put Airtabs on your hood, or anything that's a aerodynamic thing that is directional, you're going to want to know what direction the airflow is. And as I suspected, it kind of follows the contours of the creases in the hood. Those are the direction of the airflow, and that's important to acknowledge. But there's one sort of halfway from the middle, and the important thing to know about something like that, about putting air directors or aerodynamic things on a hood, is that the airflow is not straight from the front of the car to the back. Instead, it will swerve around the windshield area in the cabin. So what you'll see is at the edge, the airflow is going quite strikingly to the side. It really points to the side most aggressively. And then at the exact center of the vehicle, it will be straight, because there's nowhere for the air to go except for like vertically, up over the cabin. But then halfway between, it'll split the difference, and the wind, even though it seems to be pointing straight over the car, the wind is not actually going to go straight, and then only the stuff on the edge is going to go to the side. It'll blend, it'll go out. And this is why I put pieces of yarn on my hood, to test that out and confirm my sense of the direction that each of these Airtabs should be going. And that will hold also for anywhere else on the vehicle. Hopefully I can sort of get a decent guess as to how it should work. But the hood ones are the ones where I'm most interested, really. And then at the back of the cabin, it's almost going to be kind of the same thing in reverse, in that it's going to be sort of coming straight off the back edge of the roof. And even though it's not a sharp break, it's still perfectly fine to put these turbulence things in there. There's no problem with that. But as the air is coming together, the direction of the airflow is most likely going to converge a little bit towards the back end of the vehicle. So there is that. That is also a thing. Once I'm finished doing this airflow stuff, I have another thing happening today, unless I horribly screw up my timing with all of this, and that is having the car undercoated, which I decided to do because I was getting it from a dealership, and that's supposed to lower road noise, so we'll also hear some of that, possibly by the time I do another video capture. And again, I think I said before, the Xiaomi E is very good for this purpose, because the thing is, this does not have a compressor built into it. I recorded drums with it. The drums just distorted horribly. It is a fixed volume level. So compared with something like an iPhone that has intelligent volume management, the E is a disaster, but it will be effective for this purpose of calibrating noise levels. It's always going to be the same recording level, and I should get pretty much the same noise level out of it. Now, what I'm not sure about is whether I'm going to be able to get to the speed that I want coming out of this traffic light, because this is a fairly new addition, and it's a bit of an annoying traffic light. See, I've just got a green now, but I think it maybe put me in this like slow line of cars trundling onwards towards whatever that town is, trundling onwards towards the Shaws. And that's not what I'm looking for, but it will at least be on a state highway, so I will at least be able to make it go a little faster. This used to not have a traffic light. I suppose if I'm really lucky, I might stop as the first person to get caught by the yellow. That'd be handy. Oh, and there's a big old truck somewhere ahead of me. That's also going to be something of a burden. Alrighty, so I've got a green. Let's see how this works. There's our 60. Here's the wind noise at 60, a little bit more than 60. In the stock car with no aerodynamics. Observe. And now we're done with that. So, I will cease my recording, and we'll get back to this when I have a little more done. Alright. Here I am, and this is Airtabs. You can see they kind of match these panels here. It says Airtab fuel savers, which is what they're for. They also help extremely high speed performance, but that's probably not going to be an issue here. I have them where the lines of the car, the airflow is going to be going pretty much this direction. You can also see how these guys, the airflow follows these lines. They're well designed that way. It's not a bump that's causing turbulence. The airflow is going this way. So it's largely following where the air is going to go. And on the back, we have a similar behavior. You can see that this is actually following where the airflow will go. The direction of that line is parallel to where the air goes, and that's intentional. I know that they did that on purpose. So in the center, straight, and then as we get over to the side, as the air starts to close in behind the car again, we got one of these here. So I have 5 of them on the front, 5 of them on the back, and I have 2 tucked in behind these windows just because I thought that might be nice, and it was a flat plane. It's useful to find perfectly flat surfaces for these guys. They don't really want to bend. And I'm not even late for going and getting undercoating. So I'm going to go and do a recording now, which is these on the way to Keene, and Airtabs only, no undercoating. Okay, here we are again. I am heading out on my way. Oh, this is where I had my little note of things to do. I was wondering where I'd put that, now I know. Yeah, so here we are again, and I've moved the camera, you may notice. And that is because it was on some sort of tint stuff here, which is painted onto the window, and that caused the suction cup to literally fall off after I'd finished doing all of my stuff. And that's no fun. So we're going to head out to Keene, because this is about the time to do it, and I'll be able to hit my 60-mile-an-hour goal there. And you may immediately notice that there is no difference in quiet or low speed noise level. And that's because Airtabs are a form of streamlining, and we're not going to notice any difference until we get up to a higher speed, at which point the wind noise is going to be real different. So what I'm going to do is head on my way. I'll be going in opposite direction through the area I'm talking. Actually, no, I don't have to. I can go over the same roads. Maybe that'll be a useful comparison. And once I start speeding up a little bit, and we start going faster, we will hear at least a preliminary difference in the sound of the wind over this car. We might even be able to hear a little of it now, but we'll certainly hear it once we get out onto a state highway. Now there may be some difference in the cabin noise because the position of the camera is different. You know, I can't help that. Oh, mister. I can't help that because I don't feel like having the camera falling on its face again. Suppose it wasn't too nasty of a fall. It seems to work. We'll find out later whether the camera was broken by that little misadventure. But what we're going to do is a little cross-cutting between the noise level as we drive around with these Airtabs on, and I did a little bitty video showing what those are, and the noise level of driving around without Airtabs. And I might even be able to do another recording, since it seems like I'm taking this camera on the road. I might even be able to do another recording with all that plus the undercoating, because I am going out to get undercoating today. That, on the one hand, is for the purposes of keeping the car from rusting and stuff, but it also supposed to have 30% cut in road noise, and I think that's probably dubious. I will literally be able to measure that if all goes well. I can tack the little camera up and get on the road and literally demonstrate how much of a difference the undercoating makes. So that might be nice too. do all of these things, and I'll be editing together the final result. And again, I have had to move the camera. It's over there now. But the camera itself is the same camera, and it has a fixed microphone level. Like, it doesn't have a compressor, so it's going to be giving me a calibrated result. The volume level in the car is not going to be substantially different, or the volume level is not going to be substantially altered by moving it 6 inches to the right. That's going to be just sort of normalcy. Also, you'll note I have it over there because I could have it like straight in front of me, and unless I work out a better way of doing it, I don't feel like having it obscuring my vision. I will sort out at some point whether I feel like going there. I will also sort out whether I feel like attaching it permanently to the middle area where that shading is. And you know, I think I'm already hearing a difference. Like in this little stretch of road, I'm going pretty close to 60 right here, and I think there's a difference. We will notice most strikingly if I take this car on Road 2 or something where everybody goes 80 miles an hour. And I ain't sure if I'm going 80 miles an hour on the state highways around here because there's really no call to, nobody else is doing it. Route 2, if you want to go with the flow of traffic, you have to go at least 70, if not more. That is not the case here. Also, this is a good place to be checking this kind of stuff out, because one of the things I will be doing with this car is putting a Borla muffler in it. That's going to help my gas mileage, and it'll also make it more fun to hear. Like if I step on the gas, you'll actually be able to hear it rather than not even being able to hear it over the road noise. But it will tend to cut down the level of sound calibration I can get off of things like road noise. It'll be a bit of a distraction, you know, an additional intentional factor of noise that hopefully, I don't imagine it's going to be super loud. It's not going to be too loud, but it will affect the calibration of our noise level testing here. Now, one thing you might be noticing with this test is that the sound of the air noise is higher pitched. I've noticed when I put lots and lots of Airtabs all over the place, I got an increased higher pitched noise and much reduced low frequency noise. I think the low frequency noise, sort of thundery effect of the air flipping out, I think that causes more drag. Adding a lot of high frequency noise, at a certain point it'll get to where that is adding drag too, but I think the low frequency noise is indicative of having a bunch of drag going on. But again, I'm on the verge of being able to test this out for realsies by my calibrated Xiaomi Yi recording. In that that sucker is recording at exactly the same level that it was before. Oh, what are you doing? That's amusing. I have a couple of drivers here, and they're acting silly. One of them, they're stopped at a light. It does say stop here on red, and a fellow with a North Country Medical Courier Services, I suppose that's pretty important, tried to pull ahead of the other fella. He was behaving like maybe he should go through the red light for some reason. I see a very good reason why he shouldn't, right there. There's somebody else. And that presumably is a very good reason why that guy shouldn't have been sitting in the way of the other cars. So I guess there was their correction right there. The other fellow was in the passing lane. We have to pull around an area on this bridge in order to get through the lights. And yep, I guess he was just blocking everybody. Go figure. So we got a nice little stoplight going on here. You were seeing Westminster this way. Big old nice bush and shrubbery and somebody's lawn. Always kind of amazes me that somebody goes to the trouble of mowing all these lawns. You see these wonderful fields and things, and unless they have flocks of sheep running around on them, somebody is actually mowing that stuff, which seems like a lot of trouble to go to. And off we go. Now, in order to get the Airtabs to stick, I had to get some 90% isopropyl alcohol, probably 70 would have done too, and cleaned off the paint real good with a paper towel. But it was sticky, and it wasn't as thin of an adhesive as some other versions of the stuff I had found. I'm using the black shiny Airtabs. And here we are, we're going up to very likely 60, because I bet this medical courier is going to go 60. Or maybe not. Here's 60. Okay, I'll be passing him later. And I think you can hear, I think we'll find on the measurement running the camera. Oh, here we go. That this is a quieter wind noise than before. I'm also going to see whether I can pass some guys on an area coming up. And that'll give us an even clearer sense of whether this is really cutting down wind noise. In future, I may also put these Airtabs in front of the wheel wells and in places like that, just to see what I get regarding the amount of streamlining I can get out of this, because there's a limit. You can't just stick them over every inch of everything. It'll just get ridiculous. They are better left to carefully chosen locations. Okay, so here we have an area already getting on towards 70. This is a passing zone, so this Volkswagen might choose to pass. I do as well. 70. No, I'm not going to pass it too much. Fine. Definitely sounding smoother than it did before. I wasn't doing 70 before, but I have done it in this car, doing things like that. And yeah, I believe the Airtab experiment is pretty successful. Although I only really have 60 as a good reference. This guy's continuing to go 70, and it's completely happy doing so. I have no trouble with this at all. My little tripodometer. Reset the NPG, because at some point I'm going to be measuring that too. So yeah, this is the loudness of 70-ish or so with the Airtabs included in the car. And I can interpolate that by here 60 again. 60 compared to the unaltered vehicle. The unaltered vehicle, I feel, produces more in the way of low frequency rumble. in the cabin. Everything else is exactly the same, including that I have the AC on, and the fan's been on 1 this entire time. So I will also point out that this is Airtabs alone. I'm going to be adding Dynamat and Frost King, and I'll be explaining what the difference is between Dynamat and Frost King in another video. And I'm going to get the car undercoated, and that's supposed to cut down road noise as well, and I'm far from sure that's going to be the case. But I do know that if this undercoating, judging from the way that it behaved on a little pane, because they show you it on a little pane in the dealership, it will cut down panel vibrations. So if that's actually a thing, then it will cut down noise, even if the panels are not being vibrated directly. If nearby acoustic noise is going through the panels, and they have resonances and are capable of vibrating, then that will be sort of like a reverb effect on the road noise. And if you damp the panel vibrations, that reverb effect will go away, and it will not be causing as much sound. The same sound can be getting through the panel, but the panel is not doing sympathetic vibrations under those circumstances. So we'll see. It'll probably be night by the time I'm heading out in this vehicle again, but the next time you see me in this little sequence of videos, it will be with the underneath of the car undercoated, and we'll be able to cut back and forth between this and that and see if there's a difference. And then eventually, once I do the whole thing, like the Dynamat and the Frost King, and I will deal with the fallacy of whether there is a better between Dynamat and Frost King. They are completely different things. Frost King is a light foam-based stuff. It's a constrained layer damping with the foil thing. It's not heavy, and it is damping of panel resonances. It's quite effective at that. Dynamat also has a foil backing, and it's a heavy sort of butyl rubber asphalty-like substance. It's not really asphalty though. It's not supposed to stink in the way that asphalt does. And that will cover holes, say holes in your door or whatever, which is what I intend to use it for. My speakers will work better, even the stock ones, by covering the interior holes in the door with Dynamat. Otherwise, I'm depending entirely on this outer skin of the door to seal up the inside of the speaker enclosure, because the door is effectively the speaker enclosure. And so you could be simultaneously using Dynamat and Frost King. There's no reason not to. You can use Dynamat only over sections that have exposed holes. You can stick Frost King over the sections that are solid metal. That'll save a little bit of weight, as well as also damping the panel very effectively, because you don't really need the extra weight literally on top of the panel if the panel is already rigid. A metal wall is not going to be letting through bass and acoustic phenomena as easily, but it will vibrate and it will resonate. Whereas a hole in the metal wall, well, that's going to let through all kinds of acoustic phenomena. And the hole in the wall does need to have something like Dynamat over the top of it. In fact, people do things like getting aluminum flashing, which I might try to do today as well, and putting it on the inside of the hole before they put the Dynamat over, and that's very sensible, because what you're doing is essentially making a panel to be rigid and cover up that hole. You can also use a small section of aluminum sheeting or anything, wood. You can use light wood as long as you don't think it's going to fall off and go into the inside of the door. Lastly, what I'm intending to do when I have access to the door, take it apart. I found some good YouTube things for how to take the door of a Subaru apart. Once I have holes that expose the inside, the outer skin of the door, I'm going to find a way to put some Frost King in there on areas of the door. This is vertical and the outside of the door is curved this way. I'm going to try to lean some Frost King on the outside of it so that it's not in the way of anything and it's not going to block anything, and it's also sort of tilting that away so that if it melted, for instance, and came loose, it would just sort of fall against the door harder and not unpeel in any way. And the purpose of that idea is to have some degree of damping over the outer skin, because if you tap it, it will ring. And it is fairly sturdy steel, but honestly, Frost King ought to be pretty decent at damping down the resonant qualities of it. I shouldn't need to put full-on Dynamat across the inside skin of the door, much less all across the inside skin of the door where it might come off. Instead, I'm going to stick with the Frost King that is lighter and still has adhesive to it, and I'm going to pick areas where it's impossible for it to fall off into the mechanisms of the door. Instead, it'll be areas where it's leaning outwards enough that if it falls, it can only fall against the door some more. And I'm going to use a minimal area of the stuff, because the last thing I want to do is have my windows gunked up with Frost King or something like that. I'll do my best to film it. I'll do my best to show how that's done. And you will also see how I make my decisions around where to put Dynamat, where to put Frost King, and so on, which is also going to be an interesting process, because it's not like there's exactly a right or a wrong, but there's definitely an optimal and a suboptimal. The obvious example of that would be if I stuck Frost King over all the holes and then I put Dynamat everywhere else, I would be using everything in its least effective way. The Dynamat would be very solidly damping the panes of metal, but you know, it doesn't really need to be that over-damped because it would already be effectively getting damped. And then the Frost King covering the holes would not have any mass. And people don't necessarily understand this when they get really excited about Frost King and they say, oh, it's literally as good as Dynamat, there's no purpose ever to have mass. That's not true. If you had no slow truck. Dynamat bridging a gap, if you have it bridging a hole, the mass is going to have a direct effect on how sealed off that hole is going to be. You could have multiple layers of Dynamat in some circumstances and have it produce a more effective soundproofing. And it's not dissimilar to recording studio soundproofing, which is where my experience kind of lies. I'm Chris from Air Windows, so I know about a lot of those things too. Soundproofing in studios may very well include things like limp mass barriers, like mass-loaded vinyl, for instance. And what that is like a curtain that's hanging down and blocking between two areas. It's limp so it can't have any kind of vibration. But the reason to just literally hang a dangling curtain of mass between two acoustic spaces is that sound is going to have trouble getting past that. If you hung a weightless curtain, it would make no difference. The sound would be able to move it perfectly fine. But a heavy curtain, that's going to be a lot more effective. And that's what Dynamat is like. Dynamat is like a sticky, heavy, loaded vinyl, mass with additional rigidity produced by that foil. But the weight of it is not an accident. Anywhere that it's blocking a hole, anywhere that it's just the Dynamat blocking the inside of the door, blocking some kind of gap or some kind of place where sound could otherwise get through, or even blocking a big flat area of sheet metal. Because the bigger a flat area is, the more it's going to be able to flex as sound tries to get through it, down into low frequencies as well. In fact, if it's relatively light sheet metal, it's going to have an easier time letting low frequencies through, and that's exactly where adding mass loading with something like Dynamat is going to help you. So, I didn't actually plan to go into all of this detail. Maybe when I actually do my examples of how these things sound, it'll be essentially just with brief examples of here's what it sounds like dead silence with the Dynamat in there. But these are points that I really wanted to make because they're true and important and interesting, and I see so little understanding of these things. When I see, I need to go online and look up things like, how do I take off the inside skin of my door in order to add this stuff. And I can find lots of people who can take off the inside skin of a door without any harm. And I appreciate that immensely, and then they end up talking a lot of nonsense about the acoustic treatments because they don't know the difference, they don't know the purposes of these things. Hopefully I can be of some help. So we're just about getting into Keene, so I will bid you good day for now. Probably the next time I see you is going to be after dark, driving home with all of the different mass loading, after dark with the undercoating installed, and that'll be nice. There's also one slight additional difference, which is I'm asking the dealership to remove the splash guards from the wheel wells of the car. I didn't really like them in the Forester that I had, and I'm not really thrilled with them in this car, and my primary reason there is they're just another source of drag. And by the way, one additional side note is that while driving on this road, and I'm going uphill a little ways into Keene, I might add, I reset the trip odometer, you saw me do it, and I've done about, looks to be 12 miles or so, and on the way into Keene, I did about 44.1 miles to gallon. So I think the Airtabs are a pretty good call. I recommend this product. It's made for trucks, and yeah, 44 miles to the gallon uphill with the use of an AEM air filter and some modifications to the airbox. So I'll just head over to the dealership and tell them what I discovered, and I'll talk to you later. Hi there. So here I am. It is night. I'm about ready to drive home, and this is with the Airtabs on in the car and the undercoating, which is supposed to be 30% quieter than without the undercoating. So it's dark, but it should be behaving pretty much the same as ever, sound-wise. We will see about that, won't we? This car has been going through some funny changes. Oh. Why are you beeping? It wants me to put a seatbelt over my groceries. That's very thoughtful. We'll do it. Why did I never think of that before? Casey, you can't notice I'm a little tired because it's been a long day, but I'm looking forward very much to getting home and heading to sleep. And if the car wants me to put a seatbelt on my groceries because it figures that there's a passenger in that seat, I have no complaint about that. That sounds reasonable enough to me. So, right on right, shall we? I think so. There's all the stoplights. Yeah, the car has been a little bit confused at times and wanting to put on a check engine light because of the increased airflow through the air filter. But it's also being kind of more zippy. Well, let's not zip up the hill. I think that caused problems for my last car. The time that I zipped up the hill and the suspension gave way once I reached the top of this hill. Right around here. Or actually once I merged. So we won't go there. But we will zip onwards. And here we have the car cruising along at 60 miles an hour. And then I ask you, lighting aside, close your eyes, is this a different sound level than coming in where I didn't have the undercarriage painted with rust proofing and damping? Again, this is a nice steady 60 miles an hour. Much the same roads I've been driving on all this time. So the question is this more quiet or not as quiet or no difference to the pass that I made coming in along this very same road at the same speed earlier today? This counts as 30% quieter. I will be completely pleased about that. I'm thinking there are some things that I can hear more easily. I'm not entirely sure. Craning my head around because I'm trying to see if you can even see my face in the light of the dashboards. Because this is not only a state highway, but it's also, I think, downhill somewhat. And I will get a sense of pretty much the maximum I can hope for mileage-wise. Before, when I took it along this drive, it was doing better than 45 miles a gallon because it's probably downhill. So I will see whether it pulls a comparable amount of gas mileage to again. Oh, this is without the fan on. Like I can hear the transmission slightly better. dark and you can't really see me or anything else anyways. So, night-night. Hi. I'm Chris, and the reason I am making this little video is because I'm doing some acoustic treatment in my car, and I wanted to show some things about the difference between Dynamat and Frost King. This is for the purposes of explaining why you would use one in certain places and why you would use another. And I'm going to be kind of quick about it because I'm trying to get as much of this that I can do done in about 2 hours before I have to do something else. Dynamat, this is the stuff that you might get, is this sort of squishy material with a foil coating on it. And Frost King, try to roll it down here. Is a foam material that's much lighter, also with the foil coating. Now here's what you need to know about the difference between these substances. The vibration is damped through a friction process where you've got an area like this. I'll tap this. This is not what you want as far as damping is concerned. We're going to put something on this. The question is, what do you put, Dynamat or Frost King? Well, this area would lend itself to Frost King because the area moving like a sort of steel drum, if you put the foam stuff and then foil on top of that, if it was to resonate in these ways, this too, anywhere you can get a good steel drum thing happening. Frost King will work on those circumstances because there's this space, there's a kind of foam, it's sort of, I think that's open cell foam, and then it's the space between the foam and the other layer of foil that will cause it to be damped. Like, I can put a layer of Frost King on here, which I'm going to do. I'll probably shoot another video for after. And that will control those vibrations without a lot of extra weight. Now here's something else. We're looking up into the trunk area. I'm probably going to stick some layers of Frost King inside here where my hand is going, because it's another really good steel drum kind of thing going on. And then these layers here, wherever I can find something that will resonate. This solid stuff, also Frost King, but notice this. There's air gaps here. If I was to cover up these holes, then you wouldn't hear that vibration even if it was still happening. I mean, I can damp it a little bit. But there's also, this is a sort of wall. And if you can put a wall between your interior airspace and the bits that are resonating, it will cut down the noise a little bit. Sound gets through these holes. Bass sound gets through these holes, so low frequency rumble will come through here very easily. And the thing with Dynamat, I'll grab some and hold it up here. It's getting all heated up in the sun, it's going to attach real good. If you cover these holes with Dynamat, Dynamat is heavier. When you're making this sort of barrier, between air and air, you got a hole that you're filling in, and that's the case indoors a lot too. That's where Dynamat comes into its own and starts to become a really relevant dancer. I mean, you might be covering lots of these holes, you might not be covering so many, but anywhere that you're bridging a gap like this, that is where Dynamat will make sense. And that is where Frost King, by contrast, will not make anywhere near as much sense. You know why? Because this is light, foamy stuff, and the weight of the metal on the backing is not that great. I can bridge the gap with this, and it will be cheap to do so, but it's just not going to be as effective. Compare that to this heavy material, bridge holes with this, and it's going to be a lot more effective at covering stuff up. There's lots of little holes all over the place. Any hole around here is going to be more suited to covering with Dynamat, and then if you wanted to, you could run Frost King over that. It wouldn't make a lot more additional difference, but if you just wanted to do solid panels of Frost King, that would work too. But you can see under here the extent to which, you know, we've got a panel in here that's going to have to be damped, obviously. And then we've got these gaps in here, much like in a door when there's big, you know, there's the vapor barrier, which this will replace the vapor barrier. And then there's all of these big holes sort of in the framework of the door. It's those holes that you want to bridge with Dynamat. And then any area that's not actually a hole, that's like resonant things like this, any of these resonances will carry through and you'll continue to hear them. These resonant panels that don't have holes in them are a beautiful place to use Frost King, because that will damp them. I mean, you can even sit it, well, maybe not just sit it on the thing, you have to actually attach it. There's adhesive involved and stuff. But that's where you use these respective sound treating things. So now I'm going to quickly go over and do that, because I've been doing nothing but talking and I can't really assemble all of this while also talking. So I'll get back to you in another video. Hi, I'm back, and I have a I cut myself in a little bit of the foil there. A little example to show you regarding what these various things do. Now here you can see I've got part of the wheel well here damped and part of it not. Like stuff like that, it's not ringing very hard. Stuff like that's going to have a tire on it waiting it. Here's the difference between damping one side of these resonant panels and the other. You can hear that that's still vibrating, but compare it with, here I'll use the now that's a note still, but you'll notice it stops kind of fast, whereas that has more high frequency stuff going on, and it'll sustain for longer. So here's the thing, if I had put Dynamat in there, it might have cut off even more of that sustain, but it still counts. That's still working as damping. And what I'm going to do now is install the other damping, hopefully without cutting myself. Gloves might be good for this. Gauntlets, right? but it's kind of like guitar work, like, you know, it demands a blood sacrifice before it's going to be any good. Now, similar behavior. So that is the use of Frost King, and it's cutting down the resonant frequencies of that stuff, and that will all contribute to controlling the noise levels inside the vehicle, even though it seems like you're still getting a certain amount of resonance. If you listen closely, you can hear that it is still being damped, and since it's a light substance, this is still an appropriate thing to put on a lot of different panels. Like, for instance, I'm going to be putting some there. Actually, that might have cut myself on one of these too. Be careful working on cars, kids. So I'll get back with you later once I have more stuff done. Hi, I'm Chris from Air Windows, and I'm in the middle of doing something called working on my car. As you can see, that's bits of car everywhere. And the reason I'm talking to you now is because there's a couple of things I was going to do that are a nice way of doing acoustic treatment for a car or for speakers. And here's part of what I'm talking about. So these are speakers from a stock Subaru Impreza, and they're actually not bad. These things could have been paper. They're polypropylene. There's, I believe, a rubber surround, and you can tell that because the bass in the stock system goes down really low. Now I'm going to show you some of the things that I did with this. This foam is stock. It comes with the car. But I took aluminum tape and stuck a thin strip on the inside of the cone. Could have been the outside, but I chose the inside, opposite from where the wires go in. And the idea for that is to try to step a little bit towards inducing the kind of resonance that has a particular type of breakup, like fabric speakers like Kevlar or carbon fiber have a weave, and that means that vibrations going through them will tend to induce these resonances. Well, one way to induce a bell mode resonance and just cause the driver to break up more interestingly, and it also complicates the way that vibrations propagate through the material, is by putting a layer of aluminum there. It also counts as a layer of adhesive and a constrained, it's like a constrained damping layer. It's kind of like what the Dynamat or whatever does, but in a much, much lighter, thinner basis. If you were to stick a piece of aluminum tape on, say, a cymbal, you would notice that it would have a profound effect. And that's a desirable effect on a driver, because the driver, you don't necessarily want it vibrating in any way other than pistonic. Now here's some more wildness. These are foam sort of speaker protectors, and the sound's supposed to be able to get out of them. It is flexible material, but there's a lot more going on than that, and I believe I can demonstrate that to some extent. Here we go. If you have the speaker in free air, there's a certain resonant frequency. Like if I put my ear right up to it, I hear it. Hard to say whether that's coming across on the microphone. But there's a sort of low frequency whump. Now, if I'm going to bolt this onto the car through one of these, here's what's happening. it's an enclosure. It's a smaller enclosure, so in theory it would restrict the bass by making the airspace this big rather than the size of the inside of the door. Sound coming from outside has to come through this material in order to come through the speaker cone and into the cabin. And the speaker cone is lighter than the metal of the door, it's lighter than the plastic of the door. This is one of the places where road noise comes through. So if you built it onto this, road noise has to come sort of either through this material or through this hole. Now the reason for the hole is as follows. I mentioned that if this was completely sealed up and perfectly rigid, it would be an infinite baffle enclosure that was tiny compared to the size of the car door. And as such, it would kill the bass completely. But this is not. This is a hole in the back. I kind of winged it and then came up with a size. I'll explain this in a moment. And as such, it's a enclosure, but this also makes it a resonant frequency, but it's a flexible enclosure, so the resonant frequency goes kind of weird. If I put my ear right up to this and tap it under these circumstances, that is a much lower frequency than in free air. Rather than higher, it's lower, because the small hole causes low frequencies to have to get out here, and there's resistive friction from the air, and it's like a sort of bass duct. I have every reason to believe that this is going to enhance the extreme lows of the speakers fairly well, just with a relatively cheap piece of light foamy stuff, and it will also cut down on noise from the exterior, which is going to be very nice. Lastly, here's one of the things that I always like to do. This is just rigid enough that high frequencies in mid-range will bounce around inside here, get a sort of oil can resonance. And this is a trick that I use with a lot of stuff. All acoustic damping is the placement of some kind of material that will move as waveforms hit it, as airwaves hit it, and mechanically cause a resistance. Like, we can move this and you'll hear it's making a rattly noise. You won't hear so much of the rattly noise when actually in use. I've also got it glued on there pretty sturdily. But the noise you're hearing is the noise of mechanical resistance, that it's using up energy. In fact, my fingers are fairly strong, and to make the noise I have to put a fairly firm motion onto this. Motion of this material will cause it to kind of wrinkle these places in the plastic, and that does work as damping. So when this is assembled with this little fringe thing, it's kind of as if you were filling it with fiberglass or polyfill or something. I just like it because I feel it's sort of springier, so I get a more sort of bouncy animated sound out of it, and less of the very dead dull sound of a bunch of fiberfill in there, where air to come through kind of has to resistively pull itself through all of this fiberfill or fiberglass. This is pretty well damped compared to and back to here. That's going to be very quiet over the microphone, unfortunately, but it's a fixed level microphone. That's just what we're dealing with. So that is what I'm doing with the speakers. I had ambitions towards getting a fancier kind of speaker. I fancy the Infinity Kappas. Those are woven speakers out of Kevlar, I think. But now I'm kind of pumped up to see what I can get out of these, because this is a pretty darn good stock speaker, really. It's an awfully tiny magnet, but that might be some kind of Alnico. It's certainly not a ceramic. And the cone is not bad. And the surround, those surrounds are rubber, and you will notice it if you get a stock Subaru with its speakers. The speakers do extend downwards pretty far. Now here's something else. I am going to do the inside of the doors as well as just the bare metal. And I'll tell you why. These are fairly heavy, and these in the stock vehicle are the only seal between the back wave of the speaker and the cabin. Like this is it. The metal part of the door has big empty holes in it and stuff, and so pretty much this is the enclosure. Now I'm going to be sealing up the metal part a little more than that, but since this is the enclosure, adding a little Dynamat or something on here is totally irrelevant. It's not so much that it's going to make a big difference, but it's in small ways. It's putting it here and there. And by the same token, I tucked some of the bubble wrap here into this corner, figuring that when I reassemble the door, you know, this is the enclosure, and the materials I tuck in here will keep that from having resonant qualities. It'll damp it a little bit better. And then I have another trick ready over here, which was worth talking about. Here, let me rotate around like this. I'm going to put some Dynamat down around where the speaker lives, just so that it's sort of close to where it'll be used. But I've got another trick going on, and that is I put some of this Frost King in here just so that the Dynamat will bridge that gap, and having the Dynamat bridging a gap and connecting in two places means that it's going to be more effective damping, because rather than just perfectly following the surface, there's now a sort of structure in here, and that ought to help. Although the thing about the plastic is that you're not really going to hear much resonance out of here anyway. It's pretty well damped anyways. It's just, you know, this is right where the speaker is, so the more the better. And lastly, I have a thing I'm going to be trying. I believe I have, yep, my pieces of Dynamat here. You'll notice that this bit of plastic it sounds almost like there's a frequency there. This is a spot where it can be resonant, and we don't want that, nor do we like it. Sound will be able to get out there a little more easily than this rounded surface where you'd have to compress the plastic. That's a little flatter. And I'm thinking what I'm going to try to do is take the piece of Dynamat and crease it so there's a little ridge. And let me try doing that right now then. Here's how you undo it. I'm just going to go on sort of this way. Can't take up too much space because I've got to plug something in there. And what we'll do is we'll try and crease it a bit. I've never seen anybody do this, so pay close attention. Now the purpose of this is geometry. We are damping with geometry today. And I won't be filming literally everything that I do, but I certainly will be filming the end result. Straighten this out a bit, leave the ridge there. Have the ridge sit pretty much on the center of where this is placed, and squish it down really hard. In fact, I can even fold it over and that will be fine, because I'll just unfold it afterwards. Hold it back. There. Now what I've made is this little pane that's like this has a layer of Dynamat across it, and the Dynamat has a vertical ridge that's poking up. And if it's trying to vibrate this way, this is going to provide a profound mechanical resistance to that type of motion. So we'll compare it. I think that's much less vibration than it had before. And that's one way of doing intense damping with stuff like Dynamat. You can put a little ridge in it and provide more of a mechanical resistance to motion. It's like making a little plank that's going up tangential to the pane that you're doing. So this is all good fun, and I'll catch up with you when I have something else to do. Talk to you later. Hi, I'm Chris, and I'm still working on these car things, and I just have another detail to show you with another reason for doing things. You can see here that I've been taking Dynamat and putting it on the inside of this plastic door here. This is actually the speaker enclosure. The steel door that people normally cover up completely is sort of an inner door, and I'm thinking about perhaps leaving some of it, letting air come out, for instance, maybe over here or something, because this door also serves as a speaker enclosure, and as such I'm trying to control resonance as it goes through. You can see that here I've done that thing of putting the Dynamat over a ridge. Well, I've got this big open panel here, and you'll notice that it has these little ridges here. Well, this is a potentially resonating surface, and as such it might be good to reinforce it. Adding weight is good, the Dynamat is good here, but I have an additional twist. I've done that over here. What you do is you put in the Dynamat under the edge of this ridge, fold it over, crimp it down, and then put it on. And what you get is a difference that's pretty profound. I thought that was worth pointing out because it's kind of a thing you wouldn't necessarily know to look at it, but the whole point is taking advantage of this place where the ridge goes up. You fold the Dynamat over, and the aluminum foil of this also provides stiffening, and bending it in that 90-degree angle and then over again just helps it be much more effective. Big difference there. So that's another little detail, and I'll catch back up with you later. Hey, it's Chris again. I'm going to show you the inside of a front door and some of my decisions around dealing with it. Here is the inside of a Subaru Impreza door, and as you can see, we've got this thing here. It's a sort of lateral strengthening beam. And this is a very resonant thing. Now you could put Dynamat along the flat surface, but that's not the most effective way of dealing with things. And also you'd be worrying about the Dynamat falling off. Now if we look in here, we can see that the window goes down, but it doesn't get super close to this beam. not so it would really scrape against it exactly. So here's what I'm doing. And I'll comment on the video if it turns out that this is a terrible, terrible mistake. This is folded sort of in half to go in here. I'm stuck it in fairly well. As you can see, there's a little space there. And then I fold it over around this flange and extend it upwards onto the panel. Now that means that the panel's vibrations are having to also relate to this beam. It's not just a flat damping situation, it's a more complicated situation, and this beam is being damped as well. And you can hear it's, and underneath is the same thing. Tucked it under, pinched it fairly tightly to make sure that it was stuck on there, and then pressed the remaining in real hard. We'll go back to the other one. You don't necessarily only want to do this inner panel. It's not even the only panel. There's the plastic panel, and that's the real speaker enclosure. But you might want to deal with this. I was originally going to put Dynamat down here along the bottom where this gunk has gotten out of my hand. That's great. But this turned out to be an even better idea. So I'm going in to clean the gunk off my hand, and I'll catch back up with you when I have something more to tell. Alrighty, here's some more details. Here's how my decision process is going with this car and this damping job. I've decided that these holes, these gaps, are so huge that I'm not comfortable covering them with Dynamat. I would require such a large space, and there's moving parts back here that the Dynamat could easily sag in and touch. And the thing about it is, Dynamat is not that rigid a substance. Bridging a gap like this is effectively the same thing as not having a material there at all. I mean, it does have weight, it does have damping, there is that. I could possibly bridge it a little bit, but the thing is that it's just a flexible material. I mean, you can flex it awfully easily, and if it's covering something this big, it's just going to be able to move with base anyhow. So I'm going to be relying on the plastic part of the door to actually seal it and give me base. And that makes it all the more important to damp things on this door that would rattle or just damp all the parts of the door so that it's more solid. I've already done the outer skin, and I have put a panel directly over where the speaker mounts and poked holes where the screws go in, and I'll be installing the speaker on top of that. This is a hole gap, and it was so close to the speaker I thought it would be a good idea to just do that. And then occasional little holes here, they bridge the little bitty gaps, and they also damp the resonation of that. But most importantly, I put a big pane of it down here because this is clearly just covering over the area, but it has the capacity to rattle and a plasticky noise, and I don't want any of that, so I have a pane of Dynamat directly over this surface. And we'll probably run with something like that. This is not going to be a super heavy Dynamat job. And the reason I've given is I'm not prepared to cover all of these panels. It's sort of ridiculous, and I don't want much going back here because this is where the window goes, and the car wouldn't like that. I'm pretty sure I can get away with this, just judging by where things seem to clear. I think the thickness of one layer of Dynamat will clear this. After all, this sticks out even farther, and I'm not attempting to put Dynamat over it. So all told, most of this is pretty damped, and it'll be time to put the skin back on the door pretty soon. I'm going to do the other one, and I'm going to go through and do the other doors and see how that works. And then it'll be time to put everything back together. But that is more of my thought process in dealing with this. If it was a bunch of small holes, I'd be delighted to bridge them all with Dynamat, but I just don't feel that you can bridge a gap this size with Dynamat and have it work, because it's not a rigid material. It's like tar and stuff. And even if you put like aluminum flashing and then Dynamat, that's still not, compared to this, that's still not very sturdy, and there's moving parts back here, so I just don't like it. Alrighty, and onwards with the project. Hi, I'm Chris from Air Windows, and here I am in my thoroughly soundproofed car. And this is the one where I've done all of the things, and so this is to be compared to other drives and other levels of soundproofing. This is pretty much maxed out. In theory, I could do some stuff a little bit more than this, but this is pretty intensely dealt with. First thing we did was those Airtabs that are cutting down the wind noise when I'm going fast, or relatively fast. Then I did the trunk and soundproofed that. And now I have gone in, and it took me kind of all day, but I did all the doors. I've also set up the speakers in a way that I'm pleased with, in that they're still the stock speakers, but I did some little modifications to them, and I installed these sort of foam things that serve the purpose of changing the resonant frequency of the drivers. And I think this isn't a successful experiment, although it's having a tendency of like lowering the resonant frequency so much. Here, let me get through here. Lowering the resonant frequency so much that it feels like with some content, like I was just listening to some Dead Mouse, and I can't play that and put it on YouTube, so I won't. But that gave bass that was so deep that it kind of stressed out the amplifier a little bit, and I wasn't able to turn it up super loud without hearing distortion. But part of the reason I could hear distortion is that the behavior of this car is cleaned up so much that you can hear everything. And I will be demonstrating that by going 60 miles an hour right about now. Stuff outside of the car pretty well this way. And here's 40. There's my arm brushing the rest there. It's so quiet. actually hear things around you a lot better this way too. So in theory, that's a safety feature. I can hear my transmission there. It's a little spacey drone. I do have a muffler to add to this vehicle. The thing is that the way I'm going to install it, you won't actually notice that it's any different. You can't hear the engine here, can you? I can hear the engine from mostly the air intake if I step on it. And with the muffler, it's a Borla, but it's going to be exhaust coming down this way, then the Borla will be that way, and then it'll turn around and go out the actual exhaust of the vehicle. With a extended tailpipe like that, rather than just having the muffler tacked right on the end of it, it should be real nice and quiet unless I'm actually stomping on the gas for some reason. And then it'll be sort of polite, but it will have a voice. And I'm hoping I'll be able to hear the way, hear the different textures of the road surface. I'm hoping I'll be able to hear the gas mileage I'm putting on this when I do that. I think this fellow in front of me is going to go at least at the speed limit, if not 60, so let's join him. See, there's the engine, but you can sort of barely hear it. And that was all from the front. You can't tell with the E because it's mono, but all that sound was pretty much from the front. Here we are at about 55, which is, I believe, the legal limit from right here. And yeah, so quiet you can hear me buffing the steering wheel or switching my head. All things considered, I think that this noise damping exercise has been a successful one. I'm also pretty relieved because it means that I can move on to other things, having successfully completed this project. This also means I can do road trips and go visit people and bring audio stuff or whatever. I'm tempted to turn the stereo on, but I have copyrighted music in there. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. With you guys, I'm going to stop recording and I'm going to listen to my copyrighted music now. Cheers.